G'day! Remember when Melbourne was absolutely ripper? When you could feel something big happening and anything seemed possible? If you lived there during the 1970s, you know what made that decade so bloody beaut. From the footy to the music scene, from trams rattling down the streets to stouches in the city, let's take you back to what life was really like in Melbourne during those bonza years. Living in the suburbs. What's the first thing that pops into your noggin when you think about Melbourne living in the 70s? For most folks, it was the backyard. Every home had one, and they were massive. Hills hoists creaking in the breeze, veggie patches your dad proudly watered, and that one lemon or fig tree your European neighbours planted the day they moved in. Inside, the decor was pure 1970s Australia. Burnt orange, mustard yellow, avocado green. Shag carpets so thick the vacuum cleaner nearly gave up. Laminate kitchen tables, vinyl chairs, brick feature walls. Simple, warm and a bit daggy, but we loved it. And the best part? Ordinary battlers could actually afford a home. A bloke working at the factories in Dandenong or Clayton could save up and buy a block in places like Mount Waverley, Heidelberg or Oakley. Fair dinkum times, mate. Meanwhile, the Housing Commission towers in Fitzroy, Collingwood and Carlton were meant to be modern living, but knocking down whole streets meant the old neighbourhood bonds got lost. People didn't realise what was being wiped away until it was gone. And hey, if you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, give us a like and subscribe. We've got heaps more Melbourne stories coming your way. Getting around. Trams, cars and freeways. Righto, let's talk about how Melbourne moved. The trams were everywhere. The green and gold W class rattled so loud you could hear them ages before they arrived. Conductors strolling through the carriage having a yarn with passengers was just part of daily life. In the early 70s, the sleeker Z-Class rolled in, but they never had the charm of the old Ws. But Melbourne was quickly becoming a car city. Holdens and Fords lined every street, and blokes treated their cars like prized possessions. Almost 2/3 of workers were driving by the early 70s. Freeways were carving their way across the city, the Southeastern, Tullamarine and Westgate. And of course, the 1970 Westgate Bridge collapse shocked the country. 35 workers died. It changed workplace safety forever. Then came the 1973 oil crisis. Petrol prices shot up overnight. Melbourne drivers queuing for fuel were absolutely ropeable. For a city built around cars, it was chaos. The music scene. Melbourne's music scene in the 70s. Absolutely legendary. Skyhooks ruled the mid-70s. Their album, Living in the 70s, captured Melbourne life perfectly. Suburban streets, inner city culture, everything. They were singing about our world, our experiences. Bloody iconic. Then there was Sunbury, Australia's answer to Woodstock. From 1972 to 1975, the biggest Aussie bands packed out the paddocks. Billy Thorpe, Daddy Cool, Madder Lake. No international headliners needed. It proved Australia could stand on its own musical feet. The pub rock scene was exploding too. Carlton, Fitzroy and St Kilda were full of venues where bands cut their teeth. The Seaview Hotel in St Kilda later became a hotspot for the punk and alternative wave. And places like La Mama Theatre in Carlton nurtured experimental and uni-driven music. Some of it sounded bonkers at the time, but Melbourne was pushing boundaries and shaping its identity. The footy. Can't talk about Melbourne in the 70s without the footy. Saturday Arvo at the MCG was practically sacred. Over 100,000 fans packed in for the big clashes. The 1970 Carlton vs Collingwood Grand Final? Still the biggest crowd ever. 121,696 people. Carlton's comeback still gives people goosebumps. Every suburb had its team. North Melbourne finally rose to the top. Hawthorn became unstoppable. Richmond was massive. And Collingwood? You loved them or you hated them. No middle ground. Kids played footy everywhere. Streets, parks, schoolyards. Everyone dreamed of getting into the VFL. You'd head down to the local oval with your mates, a footy under your arm, and maybe your old man shouting tips from the sidelines. And if this is bringing back memories, smash that subscribe button. Helps the channel heaps. The protests and the change. Melbourne in the 70s was a city finding its voice. Protests were constant. Vietnam War marches filled the streets. Women's liberation rallies challenged the old norms. Communities fought fiercely to protect their neighbourhoods from freeway developments that would have bulldozed them. Carlton residents famously stopped the Housing Commission from flattening more streets. Ordinary people stood up and said, "Rack off, enough's enough." And they actually won. Counterculture was booming. Share houses in Fitzroy, Carlton and Brunswick were full of young people exploring new lifestyles. Communal living, new political ideas, new music, new everything. Some oldies thought they'd gone troppo, but Melbourne was shifting. With Whitlam in power, major reforms swept through. No-fault divorce, free uni, Medibank. Australia was modernising fast, and Melbourne was at the heart of the change. Entertainment and going out. Saturday nights in Melbourne were buzzing. Going to the flicks in the city was still a big event. The Capitol and State theatres drew massive crowds. When Star Wars arrived in 1977, lines wrapped around the block. Countdown was filmed right here. Molly Meldrum chatting with bands, showcasing Aussie music. The whole country watched, but Melbourne knew it was our show. Roller discos were booming. Inflation nightclub in the city attracted the trendsetters. The older crowd headed to dinner dances at the Palais in St Kilda. Families hit St Kilda's Luna Park every weekend. The scenic railway, Dagwood dogs, sideshow games. Proper Melbourne memories. Even the Melbourne Cup was changing. People rocked up in cheeky outfits, mocking the toffs in the members. Peak Melbourne larrikin spirit. Food and eating out. Melbourne in the 70s was quietly turning into a food capital. Italian and Greek migrants had already shaped the cafe scene. Lygon Street was buzzing with Italian restaurants, espresso bars and proper pasta. No more instant coffee nonsense. Vietnamese refugees arriving after the war brought flavours Melbourne had never seen. Pho, banh mi, spring rolls. Suburbs like Richmond and Footscray began transforming into cultural hubs. By the late 70s, Melbourne had more restaurants per capita than most Aussie cities. We didn't call it multicultural back then, it was just everyday life. And of course, the milk bars. Every suburb had one, usually run by a migrant family who knew every kid by name. You'd grab lollies, chips, a dim sim, maybe a Chico roll. Simple, perfect times. The reality check. But it wasn't all bonza. Inflation skyrocketed mid-decade. The big manufacturing factories started struggling. Jobs weren't as secure. Plenty of hard-working blokes suddenly found themselves out of work. Whitlam getting the sack in 1975 shook Melbourne deeply. People are still having blues about it today. And the inner suburbs? Still rough. Fitzroy had drug problems. St Kilda had crime and prostitution. Gentrification hadn't swept through yet. You had to keep your wits about you. but communities were tighter. Neighbours actually knew each other. Kids played outside till dark, while parents yarned on the veranda. People looked out for one another. That's something we've lost a bit today.
But here's what defined Melbourne in the 1970s above everything else: transformation. This was a city shedding its conservative past and embracing something new. In music, in politics, in culture, in food. Melbourne was finding its identity as a creative, multicultural, progressive city. For those who lived through the 70s, it was a time of change. Sometimes uncomfortable, often exciting, always interesting. The trams still rattled down the streets. The footy still drew the crowds. But everything else was up for grabs. What do you remember most about Melbourne in the 1970s? Your local milk bar? Your first concert? The protests you went to? Drop your memories in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. And if this brought back some good memories, hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next one. And thanks for taking this trip back to 1970s Melbourne with us.